Juan Carlos González Valencia. The man the United States now identifies as the head of Mexico's most aggressive cartel was born in a hospital in Santa Ana, California, and he has held American citizenship his entire life. His stepfather ran the organization before him. His half-brother is serving a life sentence in an American prison. And in July of 2026, the Treasury Department named him as the one who inherited all of it, though he has never once been in custody. His full name is Juan Carlos Valencia González. On federal paperwork, he appears under a string of other names: Pelon, El Tres, the R3, LJP, and a few more besides. He was born on September 12, 1984, stands about 5'9", weighs around 170 pounds, and carries the passports of 2 countries at once. The family he was born into explains most of the rest. His mother is Rosalinda González Valencia, and her husband was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, the man the world knew as El Mencho, founder and longtime leader of the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación. That made Juan Carlos his stepson. His half-brother is Rubén Oseguera González, called El Menchito, who was sentenced to life in prison by a court in Washington, D.C. on March 7, 2025. His uncle, Abigail González Valencia, ran the financial arm of the operation, known as Los Quines. He did not coast on the name. According to Mexican Defense Ministry intelligence, around 2019, he founded and took command of the Grupo Elite, the most heavily armed wing the organization has ever fielded. It operated across Michoacán, Guanajuato, and Zacatecas, and it fought the Cartel Santa Rosa de Lima, Los Viagras, and La Familia Michoacana for territory, town by town, over a period of years. Those 3 opponents tell you what the assignment was. The Cartel Santa Rosa de Lima had built its business on stealing fuel from state pipelines in Guanajuato. Los Viagras and La Familia Michoacana were entrenched in Michoacán, where the cartel he served had its deepest roots and its oldest enemies. Grupo Elite was the unit sent into the places where the organization was not welcome, and the man in command of it was the boss's stepson. A Drug Enforcement Administration investigation attributes to him the manufacture, transport, and distribution of tons of narcotics, primarily cocaine and methamphetamine, and the organization of numerous acts of violence in support of that trade. The Los Angeles Times has reported on something less obvious about him, that his American citizenship was itself an asset inside the organization, a document that opens borders his associates cannot cross. So what does the United States actually have on paper? In December of 2021, a federal grand jury in the District of Columbia indicted him on conspiracy and distribution of a controlled substance for unlawful importation into the United States, along with the use of a firearm during a narcotics transaction. The case sits inside a federal task force operation, given the codename Pinky Y Cerebro. That same month, the State Department's Narcotics Rewards Program posted a reward of up to $5 million for information leading to his arrest or conviction, with a dedicated tip line routed through the agents working El Mencho's file. Every figure in that program is a ceiling rather than a payment. It is the maximum the United States is authorized to pay for information that produces an arrest or a conviction, and the amount actually paid in any given case is decided afterward by the government at its own discretion. The posters say up to for a reason. What that indictment means in practice is not theoretical, because his half-brother already walked the same path. El Menchito was extradited, tried in the same district, convicted, and handed life without the possibility of release in March of 2025. The paperwork waiting for Juan Carlos was drawn up by the same office. Then came February of 2026 and the death of El Mencho, which left the largest question in Mexican organized crime unanswered. The Wall Street Journal reported on March 18th of that year, and El País followed on April 6th, that Juan Carlos had taken over as leader. Both accounts rest on sourcing that has not been matched elsewhere, so it is worth holding as reporting rather than as settled fact. The American government moved as though it were settled. In July of 2026, the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, coordinating with Mexico's Financial Intelligence Unit, sanctioned more than 50 people and companies tied to the cartel, and the accompanying documents named him as the organization's new leader. In a separate line of pressure, officials in Washington began publicly questioning whether his American nationality should stand at all. As of August 4, 2026, Juan Carlos González Valencia has not been arrested, tried, or convicted of anything. He is believed to be somewhere in Mexico. The charges against him remain allegations, the reward remains posted, and the citizenship he was born with remains, for now, his. Inheritance is one route to the top of a cartel. The man who comes next started as somebody's employee in the 1990s and worked his way up from there. Fausto Isidro Meza Flores. On February 4, 2025, the FBI added a new name to its 10 most wanted fugitives list, the 533rd person to appear on it since the list began. He is a man from Navojoa, Sonora, who has spent roughly 15 years at war with El Chapo Guzman's organization and is still standing. And in January of 2026, a Sinaloa state official told researchers from the International Crisis Group something uncomfortable, that this man is the one and only reason the north of the state is peaceful. He was born on June 19, 1982, in Navojoa, Sonora. Federal records list him at 5'6" and around 160 pounds. Everyone in Sinaloa calls him El Chapo Isidro, and the nickname has followed him onto every wanted poster his government has ever printed. He started young, working for the Juarez Cartel under Amado Carrillo Fuentes in the 1990s. By the mid-2000s, he had become the right hand of Alfredo Beltran Leyva, one of the four brothers who ran the Beltran Leyva organization out of Sinaloa. When Alfredo was arrested in 2008, the structure above him came apart, and Meza Flores was suddenly a man with soldiers and no boss. What he built out of that is called the Meza Flores Transnational Criminal Organization on American charging documents, and Los Mazatlecos, or the Cartel de Guasave, everywhere else. It moves heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, and marijuana north out of Sinaloa, southern Sonora, and Nayarit. The geography is the whole point. Guasave and Ahome sit on the northern coastal plain of Sinaloa, between the Sierra where the product is made and the Sonoran corridors that carry it to the Arizona line. Whoever holds that plain taxes everything that crosses it, and for most of the past 20 years, the people trying to take it from him have been the Guzman organization. The break with the Sinaloa cartel came around 2010, and it was not quiet. On July 1st of that year, his forces backed the Beltran Leyva side against Guzman's men in the town of Tubutama, Sonora, in a confrontation that cost somewhere between 30 and 70 lives depending on whose count you accept. That day is generally treated as the birth of his independent organization, because after Tubutama there was no ambiguity left about which side he was on. The pattern that followed is documented in Mexican court and press records. In November of 2011, authorities linked him to 32 corrupt police officers in the municipality of Ahome, and to an incident in Culiacan in which 16 people were found deceased in burned vehicles. In 2013, he slipped a capture attempt at a wedding in Santa Maria del Oro, Nayarit, with soldiers already on the property. In December of 2024, Mexican authorities tied his organization to a record seizure of 20 million counterfeit fentanyl pills. 20 million pills is a manufacturing figure rather than a distribution one, and it was the largest seizure of its kind Mexican authorities had recorded to that point. How does a man that visible stay out of an American courtroom for more than a decade? The answer is not that the paperwork is thin. He was first indicted on May 2, 2012, in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. A superseding indictment followed on November 26, 2019, charging conspiracy to manufacture and distribute cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana for importation into the United States across a span of 14 years, plus firearms offenses. He carries a second case in the Southern District of California from that same year. The Treasury Department designated him under the Kingpin Statute in 2013, and the State Department has offered up to $5 million for him since 2017. When the FBI announced his placement on the 10 Most Wanted list, Acting Director Brian Driscoll put the accusation plainly, saying he had spent 2 decades flooding the United States with fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, and other lethal drugs, first as an independent trafficker, and later at the head of his own cartel. The territory itself tells a stranger story. His organization now dominates Guasave, Sinaloa de Leyva, Ahome, and El Fuerte in the north of the state. And while the rest of Sinaloa came apart in factional fighting, the north did not. That is the context for the state official's remark to the International Crisis Group, an admission that the man on the wanted poster was functioning as the local order. He spent part of that period allied with the Zambada faction of the Sinaloa cartel, though Insight Crime and the journalist José Luis Montenegro both reported the alliance fracturing during 2025. On June 15, 2026, Mexican forces arrested a man identified as his operator, known as El 24, in Sinaloa. As of August 4, 2026, Fausto Isidro Meza Flores remains on the FBI 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list and remains at large, presumed to be in Sinaloa. He has never stood trial. Every charge against him is unproven, and the reward stands where it has stood since 2017. The alliance he lost was with a family that has spent 40 years at the center of the Sinaloa cartel. Only one member of it is still uncaught: Ismael Zambada Siqueiros. On July 20, 2026, a federal judge in Brooklyn sentenced Ismael Zambada Garcia, the man known as El Mayo, to life without the possibility of release and ordered him to forfeit $15 billion. 4 of his sons have been tied to the family trade. 3 of them have been arrested, convicted, or released after serving time. The 4th has never been in a cell, and the war he is now running has cost more lives than his father's entire career of avoiding one. He was born in Culiacan, Sinaloa, in 1982. The DEA does not have a precise date of birth for him, which is its own small measure of how carefully he was kept out of view. His mother is Maria del Refugio Siqueiros Aispuro. Inside the organization, he is El Mayito Flaco, and sometimes El Caballero. His brothers form the record of what usually happens. Vicente Zambada Niebla, called El Vicentillo, cooperated with American prosecutors. Serafin Zambada Ortiz served an American sentence. Ismael Zambada Imperial, El Mayito Gordo, was released around 2023. He is the only son of El Mayo still listed as a fugitive. American prosecutors first charged him in the Southern District of California in the period around 2013 and 2014, accusing him of receiving multi-kilogram shipments of methamphetamine sourced from Asia, organizing their transport through the United States, and laundering the proceeds back to Mexico. The DEA describes him today as a principal mover of methamphetamine and fentanyl along that same route. That charge was filed when he was in his early 30s, and it has never been answered. In the years since, the product line changed underneath it. The Asian supply chain that once fed methamphetamine laboratories began feeding fentanyl precursor chemicals instead, and the organization he now leads sits at the Mexican end of that supply chain. What separates him from his father is method. El Mayo survived 4 decades by negotiating, paying, and avoiding open confrontation, which is the only reason he was never arrested in Mexico. His son does not operate that way. In July of 2024, El Mayo was taken to the United States in circumstances the Mexican government still disputes. He had spent his entire career avoiding the inside of a courtroom and had never been arrested in Mexico. He landed in Texas anyway, and the faction he had built for 40 years was left without the man who had personally negotiated every truce holding it together. By September, his son had inherited the faction known as La Maitza, and on September 9th of that year, he is reported to have authorized coordinated attacks against the rival faction, led by the sons of Joaquin Guzman, passing the order through a commander known as El Comanche. That is the opening date of the Sinaloa Civil War. CNN, reporting on July 20, 2026, cited official statistics and the International Crisis Group in putting a number on it. Between September of 2024 and May of 2026, the state of Sinaloa recorded 2,829 intentional homicides. What is the United States offering for a man at the center of that? The charges themselves are on the record. He is charged in the Southern District of California under the same case number as Ivan Archivaldo Guzman Salazar, on conspiracy to distribute and import cocaine, methamphetamine, and marijuana, and on operating a continuing criminal enterprise. In February of 2026, he was named in a superseding indictment that added narco-terrorism charges and material support to a foreign terrorist organization. A set of statutes written for a different kind of defendant and now pointed at the cartels. He was made a DEA Fugitive of the Week in 2023, and new wanted posters went out on September 26, 2025. The reward figure is where the confusion lives. Numerous Mexican outlets report a bounty of up to $15 million on him. That figure is real, but it belonged to his father. The DEA's own fugitive page for the son lists no specific dollar amount at all, only that a reward is available at the discretion of the United States government. Reporting that attaches the 15 million figure to the son has carried over his father's number. His father's file closed first. El Mayo pleaded guilty on August 25, 2025, in the Eastern District of New York, and at sentencing 11 months later, United States Attorney Joseph Nocella, Jr. said the man had spent nearly 4 decades poisoning American communities and that the chapter was now closed for good. Prosecutors told the court that none of the $15 billion in ordered forfeiture has been recovered. As of August 4, 2026, Ismael Zambada Siqueiros has not been arrested. He is believed to be moving between Culiacan and the mountain zones of the Golden Triangle, the highland region where Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua meet, with some reporting placing him across the state line on the Durango side. He has never appeared before an American court, and every charge against him remains an allegation. Sinaloa and Jalisco produce the names that dominate current reporting. Tamaulipas produces a different kind of file entirely. Juan Reyes Mejia Gonzalez. The State Department still offers $5 million for information leading to his arrest. The indictments are still open. The photograph on the wanted notice is old, and the last time anyone in law enforcement placed him anywhere with confidence was around 2012. In the 14 years since, the Gulf Cartel's former second-in-command has not been arrested, has not been confirmed deceased, and has not been seen. He was born on November 18, 1975, in Ciudad Mayor, Tamaulipas, a small border town on the Rio Grande. He is listed under the aliases R1, El Quique, Quique, and Quique. Ciudad Mayor sits on the Rio Grande almost directly across from Texas, in the stretch of Tamaulipas the Gulf Cartel had treated as home ground since long before he was born. Inside the Gulf Cartel, he was frequently described as second-in-command, and he was the alleged head of the faction called Los Rojos. His job was the cocaine pipeline. He coordinated multi-ton shipments moving from South American suppliers through Central America into the Tamaulipas plazas, and from there into the Nuevo Laredo and Reynosa corridors that feed directly into Texas. That is one of the most valuable stretches of ground in the hemisphere, and it is the reason the Gulf Cartel eventually turned on itself. The organization he worked for was the oldest of its kind in Mexico, and by the end of the 2000s, it had lost the ability to hold itself together. Its armed wing, the Zetas, had already broken away and become a rival. What remained divided into blocks that answered to different men, and the two that mattered in Tamaulipas were Los Rojos, the faction attributed to him, and Los Metros, the faction that controlled Reynosa. They were not rival cartels. They were two halves of the same one, sharing suppliers, routes, and payrolls. Samuel Flores Borrego went by El Metro Tres, and he had come up through the Gulf Cartel's own ranks to lead the rival Los Metros faction. On September 2, 2011, he was found on the highway between Reynosa and Monterrey, alongside a state police officer named Eloy Lerma Garcia. Both men had been harmed fatally. The Mexican Army's assessment named Mejia Gonzalez and Rafael Cardenas Vela as the men who presumably ordered it, and the hedge in that wording has never been removed. What followed was not a dispute. It was a year of internal war between Los Rojos and Los Metros that cost more than 200 lives across Tamaulipas, and by early 2012, Los Metros had won it. Mejia Gonzalez was on the losing side, and that is the last chapter of his life that anyone can document. There is no arrest record after it, no confirmed sighting, no seized property, no intercepted call that authorities have ever made public. So what is actually filed against him? More than most of the men on this list. He was indicted in 2006 in the Northern District of Texas, Dallas Division, on narcotics and money laundering charges. He was indicted again in 2008 in the District of Columbia on charges of conspiracy to distribute controlled substances for importation into the United States. The Treasury Department designated him a narcotics kingpin, freezing whatever American-facing assets could be identified and barring American citizens and companies from doing business with him. The State Department has offered up to $5 million for him since 2017. The dates are worth lining up. Both indictments predate the event he is best known for. He was charged in Dallas in 2006 and in Washington in 2008, years before the highway in 2011 and the faction war that followed. The American case against him was built on the cocaine pipeline alone, and it was already complete before the violence that made his alias familiar in Tamaulipas. That figure has been reported incorrectly. An Al Jazeera piece in February of 2026 put the bounty at $15 million, a number that appears to have been carried over from El Mencho's reward, which the same article also discussed. The State Department's own page and reporting by Axios on February 25, 2026, both put the correct figure at $5 million. The stranger question is whether there is anyone left to collect it. Years ago, a narco message attributed to the Zetas claimed he had died. No Mexican or American authority ever confirmed it, no remains were ever identified, and no case was ever opened. He was not removed from any wanted list. In 2026, he is still formally sought by 2 federal districts for crimes charged 18 and 20 years ago, which means the file has now been open longer than his documented career in the Gulf Cartel lasted. As of August 4, 2026, the whereabouts of Juan Reyes Mejia Gonzalez are unknown. He has never been arrested or tried. The charges against him have never been tested in court, and the reward remains posted for a man who may or may not still be alive to be found. Baja, California presents investigators with a different situation. The 2 men who hold its busiest border crossing have never been especially hard to locate. Rene and Alfonso Arzate Garcia. 2 brothers from the same hillside neighborhood in Tijuana have run the border crossing into San Diego for roughly 15 years. Federal agents in San Diego know their names, their faction, and the corridor they control. On February 26, 2026, the State Department announced a reward of $5 million for each of them, and unsealed an indictment that had been sitting since 2014. Alfonso Arzate Garcia was born on December 2, 1973, in Colonia Libertad, Tijuana. His younger brother Rene was born on June 11, 1983, in the same neighborhood. Alfonso is called El Aquiles. Rene is called La Rana. Between them, they hold what Mexican organized crime calls the Tijuana Plaza, which in practice means the whole of Baja California. They hold it for the Sinaloa Cartel, and specifically for La Mayiza, the faction loyal to El Mayo Zambada and now to his son. The DEA's account of how they have kept it for 15 years names 3 tools in order: violence, strategic alliances, and the corruption of police and political officials. Alfonso is reported to have consolidated his position during the period when the security official Julian Leizaola was running an aggressive crackdown in Tijuana, a crackdown that fell hardest on his rivals. Tijuana had been contested ground for years, fought over by the remnants of the organization that once owned it outright. When the pressure came down, it came down unevenly, and the men who were left standing afterward were the ones now on the reward posters. The business itself is the crossing. Fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamine, and marijuana move through the Tijuana ports of entry into California, which makes their stretch of fence one of the most heavily trafficked drug corridors on the American border. Colonia Libertad, where both of them were born, sits directly against that fence on the Mexican side. It is one of the oldest neighborhoods in Tijuana, and it has been a crossing point for as long as there has been something to cross. The brothers did not travel to the border to take it over. They grew up on it. The brothers are not interchangeable. Rene is the one American court documents describe as extremely violent, responsible for kidnappings, and for the taking of lives on the organization's behalf. Those same documents make an allegation that reads more like a military filing than a narcotics one, that he deploys paramilitary fighters and uses drones fitted with explosives for surveillance and for holding territory. Why did all of this surface in February of 2026? Because the legal category changed. Both brothers were first indicted on July 25, 2014, in the Southern District of California, on a comparatively narrow charge of conspiracy to import marijuana. That indictment sat for more than 11 years. Then the United States designated the Sinaloa Cartel a foreign terrorist organization, and prosecutors rebuilt the case around that designation. The superseding indictment unsealed on February 26, 2026, charges Rene Arzate Garcia with narco-terrorism. with operating a continuing criminal enterprise, with providing material support to a foreign terrorist organization, with international conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine, cocaine, fentanyl, and marijuana, and with money laundering. The terrorism counts attached to René. Alfonso remains charged under the original 2014 case, and he carries the same $5 million reward regardless. The Treasury Department had already sanctioned both brothers in August of 2023. The rewards were announced the same day the indictment came out, in coordination with the DEA's San Diego Field Division, with a tip line run out of that office. The two filings describe the same two men 12 years apart. In 2014, the American government was accusing these men of moving marijuana. In 2026, it is accusing one of them of terrorism, and the charges carry sentencing exposure that the original filing never approached. That shift came from a change in American policy toward the cartels, announced years after the original filing. The timing was not only legal. El Mayo's removal to the United States in 2024 split the Sinaloa cartel into two warring halves, and the Arzate brothers sit squarely on one side of that split. Men who had spent 15 years as regional plaza bosses became, almost overnight, senior figures in a national conflict, and American prosecutors adjusted the charges to match. Baja California also matters more in that conflict than its size suggests, because whoever holds Tijuana and Mexicali holds the shortest route from the Pacific ports to Southern California. As of August 4, 2026, both René and Alfonso Arzate Garcia are fugitives, believed to be inside Baja California, in the same state where they were born and have operated their entire adult lives. Neither has been arrested. Neither has entered a plea, and no extradition proceeding has begun, because extradition requires custody, and there is none. 12 years after the first indictment, the file against them is larger, the reward is public, and the corridor has not changed hands. Every allegation against them, including the drone allegation, remains unproven in court. Tijuana is one of two crossings that Baja California offers. The second one sits about 200 kilometers east at Mexicali, and it answers to a different man entirely. If you're liking this video and you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. We drop new cases every day. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Juan José Ponce Felix. In September of 2025, the administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration announced a new set of charges and described the defendant in blunt terms, saying he had spent years relying on kidnapping, torture, and the taking of lives to keep his grip on power. The corridor that man controls runs through Mexicali, the second of Baja California's two great crossings. American investigators allege he spends more than $1 million a month in bribes to hold it, and that the money goes to people in government, police, and military uniforms. He was born on June 30, 1982. Federal records put him at 5'11" and about 180 pounds. He is known as El Russo, the Russian, and he has moved through the paperwork under several other names as well, including Alex, Ginette, and at least two constructed identities built around the surname Felix. The organization he founded takes its name from his. Los Russos functions as the primary armed wing of La Maitza, the Zambada faction of the Sinaloa cartel. That places him directly alongside the men already covered here, working for the same faction as the Arzate brothers in Tijuana and taking direction from the same family whose only uncaught son is now running the war. An armed wing is a specific job inside these organizations. Its work is to hold ground, to answer incursions, and to enforce decisions made elsewhere, which means the men who run one accumulate a very different kind of charge sheet than the men who handle logistics. Every count in his indictment reflects that division of labor. His own history with that family goes back much further than the current conflict. He was a longtime associate of El Mayo Zambada, and when the faction split from the sons of Joaquin Guzman, he moved with it. Mexicali became one of the strongholds it could count on. The city sits directly against Calexico, California, at the eastern end of the Baja border, which makes it the second door into the same American market the Arzate brothers serve from Tijuana. The business is the same product moving along a different piece of the border. Cocaine, fentanyl, methamphetamine, and heroin travel north through his corridor into California, and the money travels back the other way to be laundered in Mexico. What the DEA describes is what he did with the corridor once he held it. According to the agency, in 2012 he commanded a fleet of cartel gunmen operating out of a ranch he controlled outside Culiacan, and that ranch was used for kidnapping, hostage-taking, and the fatal harm of people brought there. The bribery allegation sits beside that one in the same filings, a monthly payroll of officials that American prosecutors put in 7 figures. So what did it take to bring that into an American court? The original indictment predates the public reward by 10 years. On October 15, 2015, a federal grand jury in the Central District of California in Los Angeles charged him with racketeering conspiracy, violent crime in aid of racketeering, drug trafficking, hostage-taking, money laundering, and firearms violations. That combination matters, because racketeering charges let prosecutors put a whole organization's conduct in front of a single jury rather than trying one shipment at a time. A hostage-taking count in the same indictment does something similar, since it reaches conduct that happened entirely on Mexican soil and pulls it inside American jurisdiction. The case then sat under seal for nearly a decade while the war in Sinaloa reshaped everything around it. When it was written, he was a regional figure inside a cartel that was not at war with itself. By the time it surfaced, the cartel had split. His patron had been taken to the United States, and the faction he serves was fighting for its existence. On September 16, 2025, a superseding indictment was unsealed in Los Angeles, and on the same day, the State Department's Narcotics Rewards Program posted a reward of up to $5 million for information leading to his arrest or conviction. The DEA set up a dedicated tip line for him alone, which is what the agency does when it believes the information it needs is sitting with people close enough to him to recognize a face. The gap between indictment and unsealing is itself a decision. Prosecutors keep a case sealed while informants are still working, and while there is any chance of the defendant traveling somewhere, he can be picked up. Unsealing it converts the case into a public wanted notice, which is an admission that the quiet approach has run out of road. American authorities also attached warnings to his file that they do not attach to everyone. He is listed as armed, as dangerous, and specifically as an escape risk, and his known ties run beyond Mexico into California and Oregon. That last detail is the one that turns a Mexican fugitive into an American law enforcement problem, because a man with a network on both sides of the line has somewhere to go if the ground in Mexicali ever stops holding. As of August 4, 2026, Juan Jose Ponce Felix has not been arrested. He is believed to be in Mexicali, Baja California, roughly 180 kilometers from an American port of entry. On ground, his organization has held throughout the entire life of the case against him. He has never entered a plea, and every allegation in both indictments remains unproven. Baja California and Sinaloa account for one war. 600 kilometers to the south, in Michoacan, an entirely different set of alliances has been holding a different line. Juan Jose Farias Alvarez. The largest reward the United States government currently has posted for a Mexican trafficking figure belongs to a man from a farming town in Michoacan, who once stood in front of television cameras as a leader of a citizens' movement formed to drive the cartels out. He has been arrested 3 times, and 3 times the Mexican courts let him go. The State Department is now offering $10 million for him. He was born on August 10, 1970, and he comes from Tepalcatepec, in the hot country of western Michoacan. He is about 5'9" and 180 pounds, and everybody calls him El Abuelo, the grandfather. The name is older than his position, and it has followed him through every version of his career. That career began inside the Milenio Cartel, working under the organization known as Los Valencia, and at one point he operated alongside a man who would later become El Mencho. The two of them came out of the same Michoacan apprenticeship. Decades later, in 2019, El Mencho's organization released a video declaring open war on him. By 2006, Mexico's Federal Attorney General's office and its defense ministry already regarded him as one of the principal organizers of the fatal violence in Michoacan. The middle of his story is the part that makes him unusual. In 2013, when Michoacan's farming towns armed themselves against the Knights Templar, Farias was among the founders of the self-defense movement, standing alongside Hipólito Mora and the physician José Manuel Mireles. Those militias were treated at the time as a citizens' uprising. Several of them, including his, ended up as organized crime groups with better weapons and local legitimacy. His family had already been on the other side of the ledger. His brother Uriel served as mayor of Tepalcatepec from 2001 to 2008 and was among the officials swept up in the 2009 federal operation known as the Michoacanazo. The arrest record is where the pattern becomes clear. He was first detained in Apatzingan, by most accounts in January of 1998, with 127 kilograms of marijuana and roughly 30 kilograms of cannabis seed, and he was released. He was detained again on March 6, 2009, in Buenavista, Tomatlan, on weapons and drug charges, accused of running the plaza for Los Valencia across 4 municipalities, and he was later acquitted. He was captured a 3rd time on May 27, 2018, in Tepalcatepec, on accusations tied to the Jalisco cartel, firearms, and a homicide. And a judge ordered him freed within days after ruling the arrest itself unlawful. How does a man with that history end up carrying the highest bounty on the list? Because the American case is built differently from the Mexican ones. Homeland Security investigations opened the file in 2019 out of Knoxville, Tennessee and Atlanta, Georgia, tracing methamphetamine, fentanyl, heroin, and cocaine back down the chain. A federal grand jury in the District of Columbia indicted him in January of 2024 on drug conspiracy and firearms offenses. He carries a second case in the Eastern District of Tennessee, which is where the product his organization sent north was actually arriving. That is the pattern in most of these files. The charge gets written in Washington, but the evidence comes from an American city where somebody overdosed or somebody talked. Court filings describe him directing cocaine importation from Colombia by air and sea, and taxing the methamphetamine and fentanyl producers operating inside his territory. The indictment was unsealed in July of 2025 alongside Treasury sanctions, and on August 14th of that year, the State Department posted the reward of up to $10 million, the highest figure attached to any of the Michoacan targets. The tip line for him is run out of Homeland Security investigations rather than the DEA, a detail that reflects which agency actually built the file. By then, he was no longer just a regional boss. He had become the top leader of Carteles Unidos, an umbrella that gathers his own Tepalcatepec organization, Los Viagras, the Cartel de los Reyes, and what remains of the Knights Templar into a single front, held together mostly by the fact that all of them are trying to keep the Jalisco cartel out of Michoacan. That alliance is the reason his name outranks the others from the same state. Carteles Unidos works as a defensive arrangement between organizations that would otherwise be fighting each other, and he is the man who holds it together. As of August 4th, 2026, Juan José Farias Alvarez remains a fugitive, believed to be inside Michoacán. In April of 2026, a relative of his was arrested, and reporting earlier that year described his alliance with a group called Los Blancos de Troya coming apart. He has never appeared before an American judge, and every charge against him is an allegation. Umbrella organizations are only as steady as the groups underneath them. One of those groups has been the most consistently violent presence in Michoacán for more than a decade. Nicolas Sierra Santana. 7 brothers from a town in eastern Michoacán founded an armed group in 2013 to protect their region from a cartel. Within a few years, that group was extorting the avocado and lime growers it had promised to defend and burning vehicles across highways whenever the government moved against it. One brother runs what is left of it. American prosecutors indicted him in 2025, and Mexican prosecutors have been holding a kidnapping warrant for him since 2017. He was born on September 10, 1977. He is known as El Gordo and also as El Caruco, and the Sierra Santana family comes from Huetamo, in the eastern reaches of Michoacán's hot country. 7 brothers carried that surname into the group they built, which is why the organization behaved less like a business and more like a family holding a piece of territory. The organization is Los Viagras, and its origin is the same story as the previous one. It formed in 2013 as a self-defense group against the Knights Templar, and it became something else entirely once the Knights Templar were gone. The militias of that period were armed and legitimized faster than anyone thought through, and when the enemy they organized against collapsed, the weapons, the men, and the local authority all stayed exactly where they were. It sits inside the Carteles Unidos alliance, and at various points it has also worked alongside the Jalisco cartel it is supposed to be resisting. What it does now is documented in Mexican federal filings and in American charging documents. Methamphetamine, fentanyl, and heroin move through its territory. So does a protection economy built on the region's legal agriculture, the avocado and lime operations that make that part of Michoacán valuable, taxed at whatever rate the group sets. Growers who refuse the arrangement lose their crop, their equipment, or their access to the packing houses, and the practice is common enough in Michoacán to have its own everyday name. Kidnapping, arms trafficking, and the fatal harm of rivals appear in the same records, along with the road blockades and vehicle burnings that shut down Tierra Caliente, Uruapan, Zamora, and Morelia whenever pressure arrives. Those blockades have a name in Mexico. Narcobloqueos are organized operations. Vehicles are seized, driven onto highway junctions, and set alight in a coordinated pattern designed to stop federal reinforcements from reaching an area and to make the cost of an operation visible to the public within the hour. They are a signaling tool, and this group has used them more consistently than almost anyone else in the country. The Daily Beast profiled him as one of Mexico's most wanted men, facing a regional charge sheet that runs through homicide, robbery, extortion, and kidnapping. The town of Buena Vista has been cited as one of the group's bases. In July of 2018, the newly installed mayor of that municipality, Eliseo Delgado Sanchez, lost his life weeks after taking office. Mexico issued its warrant for aggravated kidnapping in 2017. It has been outstanding for 9 years now, in a state where his general whereabouts have never been much of a secret. Why has the American file only surfaced now? The same Homeland Security investigations effort that produced the case against El Abuelo produced this one. Agents opened it in 2019 out of Knoxville, Tennessee, and in the course of it, more than 1 ton of methamphetamine attributed to Carteles Unidos was seized. A federal grand jury in the District of Columbia indicted him in June of 2025 on drug conspiracy offenses, and the indictment was unsealed in July of that year, alongside Treasury sanctions naming him. On August 14, 2025, the same day El Abuelo's reward was announced, the State Department posted up to $5 million for information leading to his arrest or conviction. Mexican outlets in 2026 have described him as a parallel leader, now being targeted alongside the Jalisco Cartel's new command, which is an unusual position for a man whose organization is supposed to be that cartel's enemy. Michoacan alliances have always been more fluid than the maps suggest, and groups that fight each other in one municipality have cooperated in the next one for years. Mexico offers a separate and considerably smaller reward of 100,000 pesos, which is a useful measure of how differently the two governments price the same fugitive. One clarification belongs here, because the nickname causes confusion. There is a second figure in Mexican organized crime also called El Gordo, a financial operator tied to the Santa Rosa de Lima organization in Guanajuato. The two men are unrelated. They operate in different states for different organizations, and they are frequently mixed up in coverage of both. The people around him have been falling steadily. His second-in-command, known as El Jr., was captured in Guerrero. In July of 2026, an operator identified as El Doctor, Fernando de Jesus Ortiz Avalos, was arrested. As of August 4, 2026, Nicolas Sierra Santana himself has not been. He remains at large in Michoacan, with two governments seeking him, an unexecuted Mexican warrant now 9 years old, and an American indictment that has never been tested. Every allegation against him is unproven. 3 of the men on this list operate under the same Michoacan umbrella. In the first week of August of 2026, one of them stopped being a fugitive, Alfonso Fernandez Magallon. On the first day of August 2026, Mexican Army units moved into the municipality of Los Reyes in western Michoacan, with 2 gunship helicopters overhead. The man they came for is 56 years old and had been indicted in Washington 3 years earlier. Within hours of his arrest, roads across 2 municipalities were blocked and vehicles were burning, which is the standard local answer when a figure of that rank is taken. He is the only man on this list whose status changed while it was being compiled. He is Alfonso Fernandez Magallon, known as Poncho, and also as La Quiringua. He is among the older men on this list, and the American case against him describes a career measured in decades rather than years. American investigators identify him as the leader of the Cartel de los Reyes, one of the factions operating under the Carteles Unidos umbrella, and a close associate of El Abuelo Farias. His territory is a cluster of municipalities in western Michoacán: Buenavista, Cotija, Los Reyes de Salgado, Peribán, Tocumbo, and Tomatlán. It is not the biggest piece of ground on this list, but Homeland Security Investigations says he had been moving methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl north through it for decades, and that he controlled clandestine airstrips, which is what separates a regional operator from a link in an international supply chain. An airstrip in the Michoacán highlands is how South American cocaine enters the country without touching a port or a checkpoint, and whoever controls the strip charges everyone who uses it. Mexican authorities attribute a wider set of activity to him. Extortion, drug trafficking, vehicle theft, and kidnapping appear in their files, and so do 3 separate attacks on military personnel across 18 months. One in Cotija on January 19, 2025. 2 more in the summer of that year on June 15th in Tinguindin and July 1st in Jacona. Attacks on soldiers are what tends to change a fugitive's priority level because they turn a policing problem into a military one. The American case predates all of it, and it was built without reference to any of those incidents. A federal grand jury in the District of Columbia indicted him in July of 2023 on drug conspiracy and firearms offenses. Mexico held its own warrant against him for illegal deprivation of liberty, which is the statutory term for kidnapping, and for riot. The Treasury Department sanctioned him in August of 2025, and on August 14th of that year, the State Department posted a reward of up to $5 million, with the tip line again routed through Homeland Security investigations rather than the DEA. So what does an arrest actually settle? Less than the announcement suggest, and more than nothing. Mexico's Security Secretary, Omar Garcia Harfuch, confirmed the capture publicly, and the American ambassador, Ronald Johnson, praised the operation and made the point that criminals have nowhere left to hide. The two gunship helicopters over Los Reyes were the visible half of an operation that had clearly been planned for some time, in a state where the last several attempts at this had gone badly. What the arrest does in legal terms is move him from a fugitive list into Mexican custody, where a Mexican prosecution and an American extradition request now have to compete for him. Extradition from Mexico is not quick. It runs through a foreign ministry review, a district judge, and an appeals process that a well-funded defendant can extend for years, and the Mexican charges against him have to be resolved or set aside before the American ones get their turn. That is not a formality in Michoacán. This is the same state where El Abuelo was released by a judge within days of a 2018 arrest on the grounds that the arrest itself was unlawful, and where a 2009 detention ended in acquittal. Arrests in Michoacán have a history of coming apart on procedure, on evidence handling, and on witnesses who stop being available between the detention and the hearing. Custody and conviction are separated by a stretch of legal ground that has swallowed men in this exact position before. As of August 4, 2026, 3 days after the operation, Alfonso Fernández Magallón is in Mexican custody. He has not been extradited, has not been tried, and has not entered a plea in either country. No date has been set for anything, and no court in either country has heard a word of evidence against him. The narco-bloqueos in Los Reyes and Periban have subsided, and the municipalities he controlled have not yet shown who moves into the space he leaves behind. Carteles Unidos has lost one of its faction leaders, while the man at the top of the alliance is still being hunted. The American indictment against him remains sealed business between his lawyers and a court in Washington, D.C., and every charge in it is still an allegation. Arrest is one of the two ways a name leaves a most wanted list. The final man on this list left it the other way. Oscar Noé Medina Gonzalez. 2 days before Christmas of 2025, a man walked into a Chinese restaurant on a quiet street in the middle of Mexico City, in a neighborhood full of hotels and bars, and took the life of another man who was sitting with his family. It took 4 days for the city's prosecutors to confirm through fingerprints who the victim had been. He was the operational commander of the security apparatus of Los Chapitos, carried a $4 million American reward, and had arrived in the capital roughly 48 hours earlier. He was born on May 11, 1983, in Culiacán, Sinaloa, and he was known as El Panu. One point of accuracy matters before anything else, because it is reported wrong constantly. He was not a Jalisco cartel figure. He was Sinaloa, and specifically, he belonged to the faction run by the sons of Joaquin Guzman. His position inside that faction was as high as a non-family member gets. He was the principal lieutenant and right hand of Ivan Archivaldo Guzman Salazar. He began in the armed wing and rose until he was coordinating every regional security commander and every gunman the faction fielded, which made him the man who translated instructions from the top into action on the ground. American prosecutors describe him running the faction's territorial expansion out of Sinaloa and into Chihuahua, Sonora, Coahuila, Michoacán, and Tamaulipas. He oversaw the trafficking of marijuana, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl, and he directed armed cells inside Culiacán itself, including at the airport, with standing orders to respond to military movements. In 2019, he sat down with Ivan Archivaldo, with Jesus Alfredo Guzman, and with Nestor Isidro Perez Salas, the enforcer known as El Nini, to arrange the supply of fentanyl precursor chemicals out of China. That meeting is the point where the faction's business became what it is now. Everything the American government has said since about fentanyl coming north out of Sinaloa traces back through arrangements of that kind. Federal documents also tie him to an incident in 2017 at a ranch in Navolato, Sinaloa, where 2 agents of Mexico's Federal Attorney General's office were taken and held. Both men were later found deceased. What was the United States prepared to pay for him? $4 million, posted by the State Department after a federal grand jury in the Southern District of New York indicted him on April 4, 2023, on conspiracy to import fentanyl, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, and money laundering conspiracy. On that same day, the DEA added him to its list of top 10 priority targets, placing him alongside Ivan Archivaldo Guzman himself. The Treasury Department designated him separately, cutting him off from the American financial system. That placement is worth pausing on. He held no family name, no founding stake, and no faction of his own, and the agency put him at that level anyway, because the security structure he ran was what made everything above it work. He was never arrested, and the indictment was never answered. On Sunday, December 21st, 2025, he was at a restaurant on Niza Street in the Colonia Juarez, in the part of Mexico City known as the Zona Rosa. A gunman in dark clothing, a cap and a face mask approached him there and shot him repeatedly. Accounts of exactly how many rounds were fired differ across outlets, with some reporting a dozen strikes and others counting far more shots fired at the scene. One other man at the scene was wounded and survived. The Zona Rosa is one of the most heavily policed and heavily photographed districts in the country, full of tourists and restaurant staff at that hour, and the gunman walked out of it. Mexico City's prosecutor's office under Bertha Maria Alcalde confirmed his identity by fingerprint on December 25, 2025, and opened a case for aggravated homicide. He had been in the capital for about 2 days. Why a man in his position traveled to Mexico City at all, and who knew he was there, are the 2 questions the investigation has never publicly answered. Nobody has claimed it, and nobody has been charged. What is agreed on is the effect, because removing the man who coordinated every security commander in the faction is a structural loss rather than a symbolic one, and it landed while that faction was already fighting the Zambada side of its own cartel. As of August 4, 2026, the Mexico City investigation into his death remains open with no arrest announced. His federal case in New York was closed by his passing, which means the charges against him were never tried and never proven. The $4 million posted for him was never paid, and the DEA priority list he was added to in 2023 now carries his name only in the past tense. 10 men, 10 files, and a set of rewards that now runs from $4 million to 10. 8 of them are still out there tonight, and the governments looking for them have gone on raising the price rather than lowering it. If you want the cases behind these names, they are already on the channel. Thanks for watching. Click here for the next video.